Today, our topic is, I think, a very important thing because we talked tons about net zero, especially when we originated all these climate agreements and raised our hands up about problems with the whole planet, and energy problem connected to that, and energy crisis, and all of that only rolling further and further. But we are far away still from that. Not from 2050, but to approaching net zero in 2050. At least this is my personal belief and belief of many experts, that we are quite delayed with the net zero approach, at least with our first planning, how we were seeing that. And we have to speed up, and we have to change our strategy, and we have to collaborate our resources in the way how we do that. So today we have our webinar with our guest, which will be presented by our guest, and Hassan. Sorry, how I do pronounce your name? Jan, yeah. Correctly. Hassan is quite involved in the project management, and he worked for project management and advisory companies, really to deliver high impact, what is energy and climate changes included in the high impact initiatives, to make it not just existing at the moment, but lasting for a long period of time, and for not only for our generation, but for our society in the future as well. So how do we do that? Where do we find funds? How we have to collaborate? How we go cross field, cross sectors, cross partnership? How do we deal with the most important and most difficult topic, regulatory compliances, because this is, I think, the most difficult thing to overcome. So I leave the floor to Hassan to talk about that and to give his expertise and his opinion on that. You can ask questions in question and answer section, and then we will look at them and try to answer as many of them as possible. If we don't have enough time to answer all the questions, please subscribe for SIG Energy on our webpage, and then you can send it to us. You can send it to our email. Everything you find on our webpage of IPMA SIG Energy. Feel free to contact us after this event, or through LinkedIn, which is as well possible. So, Hassan, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for agreeing to give your expert opinion on such an important topic.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Irina, for this opportunity. Good day, everyone. Wanted to start by saying, for me, I'm in Eastern Standard Time Zone, so it's the beginning of the morning here in Ottawa, Canada, and I really appreciate it for those that are joining in westwards, where it might be the afternoon. Some people, the early evening. So just piece of gratitude for everybody joining in on the call. So my session is on a holistic and tactical approach to net zero. My journey in this space started in 2021. I was involved with a Canadian client looking to fund and initiate project plans and scope development, and essentially project execution in the green energy and green infrastructure space. So over the course of several years, I really came intrigued with how this can all happen, and also the scale at which it needs to happen. And although I was just in Canada, I could see globally what other regions and countries were doing, and it got me thinking. And over the past 12 months, I've been putting together my thoughts in a paper, and this presentation was a good summary of kind of my insights, my research, and again, really looking forward to sharing that with everybody on the call today. So, disclaimer, The views and opinions in this presentation are those of myself, Hassan Jan, the consulting firm that I lead, Khair Consulting. The other caveat that I wanted to share is that the data and the references that I cite, I've tried my best to diversify those sources. I fully understand that data at face value can say one thing, but then if you look underneath it, it can say something else, or it can posture at something else. So I've tried my best to really focus on data from different sources that helps us build this model of holistically and tactically looking at net zero targets and how we can get there with that approach. In terms of outline, I believe it's always very critical to start with the why. Why am I talking about holistically and tactically approaching net zero? Dr. Arena mentioned, where we sit in terms of our objectives globally, and are we far behind? Are we behind? Are we just there? So understanding that why is really critical for anybody that's passionate about this field and wants to make a difference. And then the three pillars of my presentation are really looking at funding. Once we have a compelling why, the question starts as to where and how we will fund this. So the three pillars for my presentation are funding streams. How do we fund this ambitious goal sustainably and across the globe? The second is partnerships. No one wants to go about this initiative by themselves. It's a daunting task. So how do cross-sector partnerships really allow us to get to those targets more meaningfully? And then third is compliance. There needs to be some type of governance and regulatory requirement other than the agreements that stipulate that we need to get to net zero by 2050 or by a such a date. And what are the milestones to get there? The small steps. So you'll see that the presentation is built on these three pillars: the funding, the partnerships, and then finally the compliance. And I'd like to conclude with three takeaways that I feel, regardless of where people on the call are joining from, whether they're in an organization or whether they're in institutions or in the private sector, public sector, they can take away and apply based on how they see it fit. So the why. When I have this discussion with other people, the common response is, don't we have things figured out? When you look at the major questions, why is net zero so important? There's a general commitment to a sustainable planet. In 2016, the UN Paris Agreement was signed. The vast majority of the member states signed off on them. And there's this global recognition that, we need to be more sustainable in how we conduct our day-to-day living, our day-to-day business, our day-to-day economy. And that why I think over the last couple of years has become a lot more clear. Like more people are talking about it, more people are concerned about it. So that's like a check mark. The second, which is, where is all of this going to come from? Between policy and funding, I feel the governments worldwide really have started to enact good policies. Some countries are more advanced than others, and we'll get into that. But generally, you'll see that there are policies consistent across the board, and you'll see funding is there too, by and large. Like there are funding mechanisms within individual countries, but there's also general funding that cross countries are providing funding to other countries if they do such and such renewable projects. So I think the where has become pretty well understood too. The how, this is, I think, a credit to where we've come to. There's a lot of innovation and technology that's been advanced in terms of being able to apply different ways of operating, whether it's plant equipment or vehicles, to be able to reduce our GHG emissions. So the how is evolving, but it's been initiated, and there's a commitment to driving that R&D space within green energy. And then finally, the what. What is all about the projects, and that comes from the industry. The industry is the one responsible for actually making these projects on paper a reality, and they see them out in the field, they see them out in the plants, uh, and they're a critical part of this whole net zero model in terms of private sector and industry collaboration. So we have all the why, the where, the how, and the what understood. Why is there a general feeling that we're still behind? And that's because each element is individually clear, but bringing them in together and fitting the pieces of the puzzle correctly are not so straightforward. It's not just a straight line. It's not just because we have a clear why, we'll get X amount of money, which will allow us to produce X technology that will be able to be embedded in X operation of a coal power plant or an oil and gas operation. It's not like a straight line that's just easily connected. It's nuanced, and it's very different when you go from region to region, from economy to economy. And I think the starting point for me was really to try to understand holistically at 10,000 feet, what does this look like? And then look at tactical ways to approach strategic areas which are not new to anyone, but it's just a different lens, and you'll see a compelling argument. So that's generally the why as to why we're talking about this today. So let's get into the first pillar, which is funding. You know, funding is the foundation of any project, regardless of what the project is. If you don't have the funding, the project cannot exist. In the green energy space, it's even more compelling, and the reason is as follows. So back in the end of 2022, right before the pandemic, at the end of the COVID pandemic, Bloomberg had put together a report, and they have a division for new energy finance. It's called BNEF. So at the end of, I believe it was December 2022, they issued an article that stated that in order to transition to net zero emissions, there's a $200 trillion investment opportunity by 2050. So they estimated this huge amount of money that's required in order to really be able to embed the things that are needed to get to net zero. And they forecasted it out. So in the decade that we're in the 2020s, they see the spend at about $5.5 trillion. In the next decade, in the 2030s, that jumps up to $7 trillion a year for that decade. And then the final decade to get to 2050, you see another uptake of almost $500 billion at $7.4 trillion. And if you sum all of that up, you get to close to $200 trillion. So that just puts a bit of emphasis on the global community as to how much needs to be spent to be even close to the target. And then what they did in this pie chart on the right is even more interesting because it'll resonate with lots of people that are in the field. So, okay, we have this $194 trillion. Where do we spend it in order to really get to net zero? And you'll see almost half of that is in the EV sector at 47%. You have low carbon power at 18%. So you're looking at renewable energies, you're looking at nuclear power, hydropower. So there's almost 20% of that spend in just focusing on low carbon power, trying to get that, get those numbers, the amount that they produce higher, the generation capacities. And then you have grids and fossil fuel processes that, if you combine them, they're close to 20%. So between the EV sales, focusing on low carbon power, and then focusing on the grid and the oil and gas sector, because the fossil fuel processes is really trying to look at ways to make that operation a bit more to make it more environmentally friendly as much as possible. And even at 7%, that's a good spend because you're getting a lot of bang for your buck in terms of their ability to produce less emissions. So between those four sectors, you have almost 90% of the spend. And those four areas are going to be key as we kind of continue through this presentation on how do we tactically target these sectors and what can we achieve as a result. So this is an interesting piece of information. What I did was, you know, I tried to look at different countries in the world, and the reference point was to look at the International Energy Agency. They're a autonomous organization based in France that focuses on sustainability. So they have a, a collection of countries that are member states, and then you have associate members. So what I did was I took four member states that are part of the International Energy Agency, Germany, Canada, the United States, Japan, and then one associated member in China. And so Germany is kind of represents Europe, kind of by and large. Canada, US, I put that for North America because a lot of my insights and research is kind of North American based and definitely at times Canada heavy. And then you have Japan and China representing Asia. So, with this profile, I wanted to look at what the IEA had in terms of data for the fossil fuel sector, manufacturing, and transportation. And what it showed me was something very similar. The picture is relatively similar across this country base that I decided to choose given the data that was available. So fossil fuels, there's no hiding it. Quarter of the GHG emission is from fossil fuels. In the United States, it's 25%. In Canada, it's as high as 42%. Almost half of the emissions are coming from our oil and gas sector. When you look at manufacturing, it's pretty steady at a quarter, like 25% of the emissions of this profile of countries comes from manufacturing from that sector. And then finally, you have transportation, which is, if you take out the United States, pretty even at 20%. And, if I just referred to the slide before, like transportation seems to be one that the Bloomberg report caught as an easy, like a short win by allocating so much funds in the EV sector that can directly impact transportation very quickly and relatively easily with the technology that's available. And we'll see later on with fossil fuels and manufacturing, there are other mechanisms that certain countries and regions have enacted that are extremely beneficial. So, in my study, now that we have this base of, what type of numbers we're looking at, 200 trillion is a lot of money. Okay, so that 200 trillion, where does it need to go in terms of sectors? What sectors do we need to target? And then benchmarking that against countries from the IEA helps us kind of validate that, what we're looking at fossil fuels, we're looking at manufacturing, we're looking at transportation, all stuff that most people in the space have known for a very long time. But the reason I started with that was, that those sectors need to be funded, and there needs to be a diversification in the way that funds are provided to them. And here I've identified four that I believe, if you use the right mix, you can provide the correct amount of funding to really engage those sectors to decarbonize. And the first is grants, probably the easiest of the four. You're looking at direct cash support to clean energy projects, research and development included. Globally, there's been a big push to provide grants to organizations that are really leading the field in green energy. And, I'll share some examples that really illustrate that. The second are tax credits. This really helps, for those that are kind of joining in from Europe or the Nordic countries in Europe, even Denmark, Belgium, that have high tax bases. Even here in Canada, the United States, the taxation is relatively high. In Asia, Japan has high taxes. So for those countries, the tax relief that you provide to companies that invest in sustainable technologies and green energy go a long way. It really incentivizes them. And because the countries have such a high tax revenue, those things are possible. Those things are possible more than in other countries. Let's put it like that. The third is kind of where you get the private sector involved, loans that traditionally banks give out for any project in the green sector. We're seeing that, certain countries and certain banks have enacted favorable loan terms, whether it's low interest or interest free or long duration repayment periods. Those are, important piece of the global economy in terms of the ability to loan to allow these projects to really hit the floor in terms of design and then finally execution. And the fourth are subsidies. So again, you're looking at direct cost reduction. So an owner that's looking to, build a $10 million wind farm, if through a subsidy that number comes down to 7 million, that goes a long way. Those subsidies go a long way in terms of bringing that total cost of a project down, helps the bottom line of the company when they're embarking on these projects. So, these four funding types are, for me, essential when we look at funding holistically for the green energy space. And I wanted to share some examples that really illustrate how this is done in different countries, for people to get takeaways as to, every country and region is doing something well. I think, to be positive, there are countries and regions that are doing things really well, and other regions can take away from what they're doing and apply to their economy or to apply to their industry. But like I said, it's not all connected, and that's one of the aims of this presentation. So in China, just in 2024, they provided almost 600 plus billion dollars in grants toward the renewable energy sector. And they did this quite strategically, again, looking at their ground realities in terms of their economy and access to materials. So they deployed that money in solar and wind power, so a focus on renewable energy. So you have massive deployment across multiple provinces of these solar and wind farms. Once that was initiated, they have a significant infrastructure and battery storage to be able to, essentially store all of this extra energy that's being produced, power that's being generated, and deploy that infrastructure across the country so that you have hotspots of storage systems. The third, again, is connected to the second, which is connected to the first, is modernizing their grid. So to have the technology to be able to integrate and absorb or incorporate, I should say, the renewable energies that are now feeding into the grid that weren't there before. And then finally, the fourth one, which is kind of tied to manufacturing, is really their EV sector, which is massive and has implications globally in terms of their ability to produce either vehicles or parts for vehicles, is really their strength. So that you can see that this spend of almost $500 billion was well thought out. And they not only studied the different options, but they knew how it would invigorate their economy, because they know that there needs to be a payback at some point. You can't just keep giving grants of $600 billion each year for the next 30 years. So this is the example that I thought really well exemplifies the use of grants. Tax credits. Since I reside in Canada, and I pay a lot of taxes, I felt, Canada is a good case study when it comes to tax credits. Our country offers anywhere between 15 and 60% of tax credits to organizations. And I've listed 4 of them here, and they line up really well with that Bloomberg report of where the money needs to be sent. So, we have 30% in the country for clean technology investment. That's for, essentially your renewables industry, solar, wind. You also even have a bit of hydro energy storage. So companies that invest in those industries, they're able to get a tax relief of 30%, which is significant. Clean hydrogen investment between 15 and 40%. You'll notice this is a range because hydrogen and the production of blue hydrogen has multiple different uses in the industry. You can use it in oil and gas. You can use it in power generation. You can even use it in the EV sector. So the government has a kind of a minimum and maximum range of how much a credit you can get based on where that investment lies in that hydrogen space. Carbon capture and storage, this is the big one in Canada, and that's because 42% of our emissions are from the oil and gas sector. So you have up to 60% of tax relief for really carbon capture, transportation, and storage, which is I'm not sure if it's a common term. I know in Canada, CCS is a big thing because of the nature of our oil sands and how we're trying to target the carbon capture. And there's a case study on this, a case reference that I want to share after. And then finally, zero emission technology. So the tax credit for that is 15%, and it's targeted towards zero emission, manufacturers in the EV sector that are looking to decarbonize and go to an electrification of their fleet of vehicles. So, between these four tax credits, this is a major initiative from the federal government in order to, again, incentivize companies to use less of their capital and to be able to not only borrow but to leverage funding from the government to really propel projects in the green energy space. Loans. So the example I used here is the client that I was helping that I mentioned in 2021. So the Canada Infrastructure Bank, they were set up in 2017. One of their major objectives was to mobilize investment in the low carbon infrastructure and also renewable energy space. So they have about a $2.5 billion allocation for clean power in their portfolio. And the way they operate is like any other bank. The difference is that, in terms of financing, they try to use, very flexible terms, whether it's a generous repayment period, whether it's a very low interest rate. But the caveat is that they provide loans case by case because they're not giving out $500,000. They're giving out large amounts of money. So the transaction or the agreement between the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which CIB is what they're known as, and the entities taking in the funding is not released. So you don't really know the nature of the transaction, not the nature, but the details, I should say, of the repayment period or at what rate they got it. But usually they study each organization and they get to a situation where it's a mutually favorable financial agreement. And the example I have here is a really interesting $600 million investment or loan from the Canada Infrastructure Bank to Enwave District Energy. And this is in Toronto, which is the biggest city in Canada. The population in the Greater Toronto area is almost 6 to 7 million people, residents. So this district energy system was studied, and in the business case to CIB, they demonstrated that the district energy system would consume 80% less electricity through the production of thermal energy and 60% reduction in CO2 emissions. So that business case was very propelling. I think the project is still in construction, and it shows really the way a loan can really propel a major project in a very urban city. And in Canada, Toronto is the most urban location. And then finally, subsidies. So this information is from an organization called the ISD, and it's based here in Canada. International Institute of Sustainable Development. So they looked at some data between 2020 and 2023 in terms of how are countries subsidizing the renewable space versus fossil fuels. So they're trying to create a reference point in relation to the country's GDP, percentage of their GDP. And what you'll notice here is, very clearly, Germany is is subsidizing their renewable space more than their fossil fuel industries, which is a great trend and a great data point to share with other countries and organizations and institutions. And you'll see that for other countries in Europe where they have good funding. Italy and France are obviously at the top of the list here in terms of their ability and their the real-time subsidization that they're providing to renewables in their countries. And the beauty is it has a trickle effect, and you can see regionally between Germany, Italy, and France, which are all relatively close together. You can see geographically, I mean, you can see that trickle effect in terms of collectively they're subsidizing that renewable energy that sector. You have Japan that's very close, that they're almost equal in terms of the subsidies to the renewable space and the fossil fuels. And then the rest of the countries, you can see it's just not easy. It's not easy to subsidize. And each country has to look at their strength in terms of what a country cannot do in terms of tax credits. Maybe they achieve it through subsidization or through grants. And here it shows that when you're talking about subsidies, Germany and Italy are doing a great job. I know many people think of China in terms of subsidies and their solar panels. But if you look at the data here, those subsidies exist, but they definitely subsidize their fossil fuel industry a lot more, like almost 4 times that amount. So that's the first pillar, funding, the 4 ways to fund and kind of how countries are going about funding. Partnerships is the second pillar. And as I said at the beginning, it's so much easier to do this with someone else than to do it just by yourself in a silo with a team of however big your team is. So partnerships are key, and they're not just one-fold. There's not just one model of partnerships. And as I got deeper into it, I realized it gets pretty complex in terms of the nature of the partnerships and the strategy behind them. So the 4 that I wanted to share with the audience today is intergovernmental agreements. So, governments need to be aligned, whether from the federal government to the provincial or state government to the municipal or city government. There needs to be a synergy between the different tiers of government, regardless of what country you go. So when a policy or a law or is put forth, the governments or entities that need to deal with how to actually enact them and to take them to industry or to take them to be able to get financing, that whole process needs to be streamlined. And it's not easy. It's political. There's a lot of red tape involved, but it's a key aspect to the strategic partnerships. The second is private sector collaboration. Again, many people know that you need the private sector and you need them to team up through consortiums or joint ventureship. Because really, when you have them team up, everybody is involved and everybody is sharing expertise and risk. Whereas if you have a bid for a project for, let's just say, a massive wind farm at $50 million and you award it to one company, whereas there was a consortium of 3 companies that were willing to bid it, that becomes a bit more interesting. You have more players that are committed to providing their resources and their expertise and their financial capabilities. So I've noticed that there's a lot of private sector collaboration that's going on to support these green energy initiatives. The third is industry alliances. These are really sector-wide initiatives that help the green energy space because of the shared infrastructure. When you have key members of the industry coming together, just what they own becomes very key to be able to getting things done because they can make decisions because they own the asset. And you'll see a case study on that, which I feel is a really good example of something that's going well. And then the last is, we need institutions that, are focused on R&D. They don't have to worry about profit and losses and operations issues. They're just, these institutions, their sole mission is for research and development and innovation. And the pool of resources they have and expertise is really critical to be able to have the best technology, the best product out there when we're looking at green energy projects. So in terms of private sector collaboration, this is one. I used to live out in Alberta, Canada, in Calgary and Edmonton. So Suncor Energy, a huge energy oil and gas producer here in Canada. ATCO is also a Canadian-based gas distribution company. So Suncor and ATCO, they came together and they conceived a project to build a clean hydrogen project where they were essentially they were essentially producing blue hydrogen. And their ability to produce 300,000 tons of clean hydrogen each year to feed back into their operations allowed them to save or reduce GHG or CO2 emissions by 2 million tons. So the project to produce that blue hydrogen at 300,000 tons a year, its ripple effect was that you were now reducing the CO2 emission by 2 million tons a year. So that was huge. And what I wanted to focus, technically these projects are great in terms of what they're able to achieve, but it's really what was the key success factor. And I have two. The first one in this partnership was that, Suncor has been in the hydrogen space for the last 50 years. They've been researching it, they've had pilot projects, so they really know hydrogen and its applications very well. And they decided to partner up with ATCO, whose expertise is really in gas infrastructure. That's what they do day and night. And between the two of them, between expertise in the hydrogen and then the gas infrastructure, they came together to really conceive of this amazing project that's having a good imprint on the oil and gas economy in Alberta, which is a province in Canada. The other second success factor was that you had both the federal government and the provincial government really align themselves in terms of policy to help this project go through. And that was important because these projects can't sit on the shelf for 3-4 years to get regulatory approval from the province and from the federal government. So because both of them were aligned and because Suncor and ATCO were focusing on their strengths in terms of being able to achieve realistic reduction in GHG emissions, this project was, I wouldn't say accelerated, but it was streamlined very well. The other two examples I have of private sector collaboration are really different. So you have the partnership between Ørsted and Siemens. So Ørsted is a Danish developer in wind farms. So they own a whole bunch of assets all across the world offshore. And then you have Siemens, which is the German giant in terms of technology. And they have so many divisions. But their renewable side came together with Ørsted and they partnered up on several wind farms. The one that I came across was in Taiwan off Shenzhou, a 900 megawatt wind farm offshore. And because Ørsted had ownership of those assets offshore of Taiwan, and Siemens had an interest to provide their turbine technology wind farm, the turbines to propel the wind farms. They came together on this, a huge project, and it's not even in Europe. So that benefit is obviously being realized in another continent in Asia, in Far East Asia. The other really interesting collaboration I found was in Central America. So you have the Inter-American Development Bank, which is its hub is in Central America, focused on Central and South America. And they came to terms with the Japan International Cooperation Agency, which is almost like a financial arm of the government in Japan. And they built a $600 million joint investment in renewable projects in Central America. And there's one in Costa Rica that's going on right now. There's one in El Salvador. And $300 million was provided by the IADB, or Inter-American Development Bank, and then $300 million by the JICA, the Japan International Cooperation Agency. So this is an interesting one where you actually have banks coming together to be able to fund projects that are of interest in a specific region. And the third one is industry alliances. This is the one that I came across when I was living in Alberta. So the Oil Sands Pathways Alliance is an alliance of six companies in Canada. So you have the Canadian Natural Resources, you have Cenovus, ConocoPhillips, Imperial Oil, Meg Energy, and Suncor. And you know, after many years of kind of this push to a green energy economy, they conceived of a project centralized around carbon capture and storage. So what they did was they planned for a project that would take CO2 from more than 20 of the oil sand facilities that they jointly owned. And they produced a carbon capture plan where they would be able to take all of this carbon emission from their plants and then capture it, and through the network of infrastructure that they collectively would build, store it underground in northern Alberta. And the breadth of infrastructure, the three success factors on my end on this one was through those six companies, you own all of those facilities in northern Alberta, which are really the focus of the GHG emission at source. You have a technical collaboration of $6 billion companies that are able to do things very quickly with the resources and the expertise and the financial strength that each of them hold. They're all very financially viable companies. And then the third is, you have one voice. So it's not that the president of Suncor says something and the president of Cenovus says something else. I think the fact that building alliance allows you to have a unified voice and also a very tapered response to things. You don't you have a very mellow reaction to things because you have six different voices that have to come to agreement before something comes out or a decision is made. And I think when you have more people, more bright minds together, that output is just better. And the fact that six of them came together is amazing in this example. And then the last one is, agreements between the government and academic institutions. So in Alberta, again, this is the final one, I think, or the second final, maybe, example from Canada, is the agreement between Alberta Innovates and the federal government's National Research Council. And it's a simple agreement to, fund projects with emerging technologies that have a commercialization element built in the study, built in the business case. And the success factors here, and I wanted to conclude this with this point too, is that not all the projects need to be big. Like this one from Alberta Innovates and CERC that joins hands with several universities in Canada. It's a relatively simple and not a huge investment, but it can be mimicked in every other province in Canada or in many other countries as well. And I think that's where you have small initiatives and large initiatives and those in the middle that can really be tailored to, whatever organization or whatever region you're from. And that I think is just an important takeaway when you're looking at partnerships, that they don't all need to be large scale, billion-dollar companies. And this is a good example where you have co-funding from this provincial entity in Alberta Innovates, and you have the National Research Council, which is really the hub of R&D for the government. And they're able to tap into, the academic chair of engineering faculties across the province of Alberta to really propel innovation and solutions that can hit the market and be commercialized and used in industry to allow for decarbonization. So the last one, I think the least fun of all of the topics is compliance. When we start talking about numbers and calculations and are we doing good? Are we doing bad? Are we fitting what was required in terms of targets? So compliance for me is a couple of different moving parts. The first is accountability. In order to be serious in this space, you need to hold yourself accountable, regardless of if you're a country or if you're an organization or an institution. You have to be accountable. Once that accountability, there's a commitment to accountability, then you need to benchmark what your numbers are at the end of the day. At the end of the year, what does the data tell you in comparison to other organizations or industries or countries? And then finally, there's this concept of trading, because not everything will be perfect. Some people will be ahead of other people, and if you embed certain characteristics of financial trading, that can really accelerate generally that sector to be more sustainability conscious or more green energy friendly. So those are the three that I felt, if each of these three parts are moving, accountability being the biggest one, then compliance will be on the right path. So the accountability here, and the reason it came to my mind first was, when I was working with Canada Infrastructure Bank, they had a relatively strong measurement and verification protocol, which was quite technical in nature in terms of whatever project that was being proposed to them. They had a technical standard. It was called the Investment Ready Energy Efficiency Certification. So that certification was conceived through the Canada Green Building Council, the CAGBC. And that was essentially the guide to make sure that the performance criteria for every project was being met. So black and white, it was a guide specific to the Canadian realities of infrastructure projects with a green lens, with a sustainability lens. And it was provided to every single organization that was looking to seek funds from the CIB. And it just leveled the playing field. Everybody was given the same information, the same performance criteria. And when one company did it, then other companies felt much more comfortable trying to achieve what their competitors were doing, because they're in the same space, and it's not rocket science. It's more a commitment to doing things a bit differently. The second thing they enacted as part of this MNV protocol was a third-party verification. So this is kind of where I was involved. So they had a technical advisory team on each project to make sure there was an independent validation of the data that was being shared to the CIB as part of monthly reporting, that, this equipment has the ability to produce X less amount of energy, and all of that data in terms of reporting was provided to the CIB and then to a third party consultant that also would go to the field or to the plant to make sure that what the company is saying is happening and is being purchased actually is there. So that I thought was great. And then the third is tying all of that into financing. So to make sure that the funding was released based on performance. And that I find is the best third. You close the loop on that one by having the funding based on performance of your project, making sure that it's hitting the metrics in terms of GHG reductions. In the case of the CIB, they were providing companies funding if they were able to produce 30% less GHG emission. And this was like 3 years ago. So you can imagine that number might go to 50% in 2 years or next year. But the idea is you need to start from somewhere and then build on it. And it goes back to kind of those small milestones to get to 2050. You need to be able to do the small things really well and then raise the bar. Benchmarking. So here the case reference is, the University of Oxford has a climate policy monitor. This is relatively recent. It was a resource that was launched in 2024. I believe there's 30 countries that have committed to participate in this grouping of countries that the university is monitoring. And they have a pretty robust framework. Again, you're looking at an institution like Oxford that's known worldwide for their academic strength and research and things of that nature. So their framework was built on three major segments. The first was the ambition of a country to reduce their GHG emissions, the comprehensiveness of their policies, and then the stringencies of their policies. So relatively qualitative. This policy monitor is qualitative. It's like a high level health check. And if you see in the case here, I just took out Canada because I was curious what the university, after reviewing all of the data provided by the Canadian government, the health check was not so bad. And although this triangle is a bit fancy, but essentially it's saying that, ambitious, the ambitiousness is good, the stringency is good, the comprehensiveness is a bit lacking. That's where you see the triangle go to like the middle with that gray line. And it has to do with public procurement. So what I think is at a high level, this policy monitor, when you're looking at different countries, does a good example, just like highlighting the gaps. If you're doing something well, you keep doing it. But if you're doing something poorly or there's room for improvement or it doesn't exist, that's what the policy is very good at flagging. And then finally, trading. Here in Canada, we've been talking about a GHG emissions cap and trading system for many years, and it allows firms to trade emission allowances, and by trading, you always one of the results of trading is competition. Who's getting the best in the trade? So that competition exists in this framework, and then finally, you have just a bit more flexibility in operation. It's not 100% black and white. There's a bit of a gray area that the trading can help you with. So the coverage scope, I think, is important in terms of the GHG emissions of targeted CO2, CH4, and N2O. They've also targeted just the upstream oil and gas, not the downstream. So just the upstream oil and gas operations. And then finally, LNG production, both onshore and offshore in Canada. And because this is something it's new in terms of how does this all get done. There's a phased implementation, which starts next year to 2029. So there's about a 3-year phased implementation period. And the actual compliance doesn't start till 2030. And I think that's a good thing in the sense that we shouldn't rush to things that are novel. We should take time to understand them, understand their repercussions, understand their benefits. And the more time we spend planning it and experimenting with it, when the time comes for full compliance or execution, we'll be successful on the first go and not be tumbling or falling short or going bankrupt. I think that's something very important in the green energy space. So the final takeaways in conclusion, I think it's been almost an hour. So the 3 takeaways, one has to do with funding. We need to target funding streams that align with local industry, because that highest impact starts in the proximity where you're in, and then it grows outwards. So, my advice on the funding is look at your local realities, local, where the funding sits in your local economy, whether it's through tax credits or whether it's through generous grants or subsidies, or even loans. Once you understand that environment where the money is active, you can make the best decision in terms of targeting funding streams. The second is, really understanding the ecosystem of partnerships. Like the few examples that I gave were really diverse. They started in a country, in Canada, and then it started within continent in terms of Germany and Denmark. And then the third one was worldwide, where you had Japan and you had Central America, or countries in Central America. So, the partnerships are vast, but the common kind of element needs to be, there has to be a joint interest to do something so you can share the investment. And once you share that investment, you tie into that strategic funding too, because you're not going about something just by yourself. And then the last one is operational integration. So, you should commit to a monitoring system. This is easier said than done. Many people say they're doing it, but they're not really doing it. And the challenge isn't implementing all of the solutions. That's not the challenge. The challenge is taking and integrating them correctly into your operations so that not only are you operating the way you want to, but you're also meeting your decarbonization targets. And that can only happen if you have a robust monitoring system that you are accountable for. So I believe if you or if organizations or institutions keep these three in mind and are able to play around with them in ways that they see benefit, that journey to net zero will be a bit easier. So I think that's the last slide. Wanted to thank you. I have a QR code here where you can kind of connect with me. Yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hassan. I will look at the question and answer question in a second, but first I have a question as we were talking about myself, as you were talking about cap and trade, yeah, system. What do you think? What is your opinion about, oops. I think Hassan just disappeared. I think the connection got broken or something. Then, okay. In this case, I cannot ask my question. Yeah, he's back. Oh, sorry, something.
Okay. I was trying to close the window, the screen, so that you don't see the screen. Sorry, I closed the window. Apologies.
As you were talking about implementation of this cap and trade system, yeah, which first actually I was a bit, you said, I think it's a good thing, and I was a bit like, good thing cap and trade, but no, then you continue. You said that to have a good period of time to check how it works, implementation period, which is so.
Yeah.
My question is, what is, in your opinion, advantage, disadvantage compared to carbon tax, cap and trade and carbon tax?
So
They kind of trying to get to the same point, yeah, but in a bit a different way. What do you think would be more efficient, or what do you think is preferred in which?
I think you said it, you hit it there. They're both trying to achieve the same thing. And the one thing I've noticed is the more you diversify the solutions, the more easier it is for the private sector to adopt one of them or a few of them, because we can't make their financial decisions. At the end of the day, they'll do what they can do, what they will do. But the one thing I've noticed is if you can start to provide multiple solutions to them to achieve that same point, they'll have to choose one. And I think if you just put one, that's when they start to find innovative ways to not do things. You know what I mean? Like you can avoid doing something. And I think that's the challenge. You don't want to disinterest them. Yeah, that's kind of my thought. It's a touchy one, but between the two, I agree with you 100%. They're trying to do the same thing, and to be honest, they were even developed at different times. So the tax credits have been there for a very long time, and they're just gaining momentum now.
Because I mean, one of them is easy, like carbon tax. It's easy to implement, right? You just go ahead and you just say that much, and this is it. This is how you go ahead. Cap and trade, in my opinion, allows you to get more information.
Yes.
To climate, but from the other side, like bureaucratically, it's probably more difficult because you have to choose which company, how you cap, whom you allow to trade, and it can involve only bigger companies, and then
100%.
practically it's probably more difficult. It's my understanding. Be wrong on that.
No, I think you're correct, because the government needs to spend so much time on the front end part of how does this all work, and that's going to take a lot, like significant amount of time, because you don't want to favor a certain company that's bigger than another company and that has more leverage. You have to actually adopt policy that is tailored to what you're trying to achieve, and I don't think anybody has it figured out. So I like the fact that they're going to take a couple of years to figure out if it's actually working or not in their favor, the government, that is.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the thing. This is when you continue in that. Yeah, this is the thing I think as well. I mean, from one side, we don't have much time for. We are really a shortage of time, and I don't think we will reach the goal of 2050. This is my personal opinion. But on the other hand, to implement something just out of the blue in a quick way can hit us even more than just to wait a bit. Even though that the recent when you look on International Atomic Energy Organization agency, I looked recently on the numbers, what they have and world data. We are still going, increasing energy consumption because I don't know who doesn't use AI nowadays, and this all requires more and more energy. And I heard as well that I read
Yeah.
that big car producers, they as well demand delay in switch to completely electric cars. All of that is getting postponed, and be really short in shortage of time for temperature raise in our climate. This is where it's
Yeah, 100%.
yeah, but otherwise, so let's check. I don't see, no, we don't have any open question at the moment. At least I don't see any on my side. But thanks a lot. Actually, I think there is a lot of to digest and to think about how, especially smaller companies, apply it
Yeah.
to their strategy, which is quite important because big companies usually have a big strategical department which guides them, or government quite often just sets very strict rules on bigger companies. You cannot avoid that, but
Yeah.
smaller companies, it's getting as well more and more important. They play essential role in all of that, but quite often they don't know how to behave because the same rules are not applied to them. So this is quite
Yeah.
to think about and to digest, I think, in this sense.
Yeah. If the small, medium size enterprises can start to provide more leadership in terms of, because for them, all this stuff is a lot easier than for a big organization that, has to turn their operation upside down to become more, more green energy friendly. But the small, medium sized firms, since they are the bulk of the economy in terms of there's so many of them, if they can just enact some of these initiatives that make sense to them, because none of the policies really help them directly right now. They're, like you said, they're targeted to the big companies. So they need to be a bit innovative. It's not as if they can't leverage the funding or they can't leverage the partnership. If you have something valuable to give, they'll take it. If you can help them get to their decarbonization targets, they'll definitely take it. So I think they have an important place to play going ahead.
Absolutely. So just the last thing, guys, for those who will have questions later, think about that, or you can find all the information as well on our webpage or our LinkedIn page. So join SIG Energy. Probably all of you who are here already are our members, but connect to our LinkedIn. You can connect to me or to Hassan directly to ask any questions you have. Thanks a lot. And the recording of this webinar will be online as well as soon as possible. So thanks a lot, Hassan, again. And
Thank you.
everyone have a nice day. And you still have, I'm in Geneva right now. Yeah. But
Okay.
I have
Wonderful.
still some day in front of me, but for you, yeah, it's a whole day. So have a lovely day, everyone.